Oh, hi there. You are listening to a preview of an in-depth episode about The Magus by John Fowles. Head over to madmethodpod.com/subscribe to get access to this full episode, the growing archive of premium content, and early access to the free show. Thank you. And there's this interesting story, and I know this is pretty far from the work of John Fowles, but I think it's worth telling because there's a real argument that the first real double-blind trial of a medical treatment was a review of Mesmer's work commissioned by King Louis XIV and carried out by a panel that included none other than Ben Franklin. Okay, now here's from the American Psychological Association on this. Quote, "The commissioners conducted several tests to determine whether animal magnetism was real or imagined. In one experiment, they tricked a young woman into believing that Mesmer disciple Charles Delson was in an adjacent room, directing animal magnetism toward her through a closed door. The woman responded by falling into convulsions and biting her hand so hard she left a mark. Another young woman drank water she believed to have been magnetized, but wasn't. She fainted and was given a bowl of water to drink to revive her. Water that, unbeknownst to her, had been magnetized. That bowl of water had no effect. The experiments proved that animal magnetism was not real, and its apparent effects were actually due to people's belief in the power of Mesmer and his colleagues. Even Delson was convinced, concluding that the, quote, imagination thus directed to the relief of suffering humanity would be a most valuable means in the hands of the medical profession. In fact, Franklin and his colleagues discovered that the true source of Mesmer's power came from his patients, who cured themselves, or at least mitigated their symptoms, through the power of their own minds. Since then, psychologists and medical hypnotists have refined that process, helping people endure painful surgery without anesthetic, for instance. But perhaps the most valuable contribution Franklin and his colleagues made was designing the first placebo-controlled blind trial, laying the foundation of modern medicine and science." End quote. But in my opinion, writing off Mesmer's work as entirely fraudulent kind of misses the point, in some ways, about how hypnotism has contributed to the understanding of psychology, and is, in fact, as I mentioned, sometimes an aspect of various kinds of psychological treatments. To get a sense of this, we don't have to argue against what Franklin is saying. After all, just because something is all in your head does not mean it is unreal. Maybe what's going on in your head is the most real thing, and when it comes to align with the outside world, we just don't notice the distinction. So, a couple of generations after Mesmer, there were competing schools around hypnotism. There was the Nancy School of Hypnotism, spearheaded by a man named Hippolyte Bernheim, and the use of hypnotism as a treatment and analysis of hysteria by Jean-Martin Charcot at some hospital in France. Though there were conflicting perspectives on what exactly hypnotism is and is for, Sigmund Freud took much from both of these schools and translated several works from them into English. This work in hypnosis was actually critical in Freud's work for, among other things, elucidating the functional reality of the unconscious. Now, if you happen to be one of those people that think everything that Freud said was BS, hopefully this is still interesting to you nonetheless. Here is something that Freud wrote in one of his introductory lectures on psychoanalysis. Quote, "When, in 1889, I took part in the extraordinarily impressive demonstrations by Lebeau and Bernheim at Nancy, I witnessed the following experiment, among others. If a man was put into a state of somnambulism, was made to experience all kinds of things in a hallucinatory manner, and was then woken up, he appeared at first to know nothing of what had happened during his hypnotic sleep. Bernheim then asked him straight out to report what had happened to him under hypnosis. The man maintained that he could remember nothing. But Bernheim held out against this, brought urgent pressure to bear on him, insisted that he knew it and must remember it. And lo and behold, the man grew uncertain, began to reflect, and recalled in a shadowy way one of the experiences that had been suggested to him. And then another piece. And the memory became clearer and more complete, and finally came to light without a break. Since, however, he knew afterwards what had happened and had learnt nothing about it from anyone else in the interval, we are justified in concluding that he had known it earlier as well. It was merely inaccessible to him. He did not know that he knew it, and thought he did not know it." End quote. Now, later on in these same lectures, Freud comments on the relationship between a characteristic of hypnosis, which Bernheim referred to as suggestibility, and his own idea of transference. Transference is this notion that old fantasies, desires, traumas, and patterns are projected into present circumstances. It's a crucial concept in psychoanalysis. The sort of trajectory of an idealized psychoanalytic healing process would include the transference of patient's feelings onto the therapist, and then sometime later the feelings are modified through the experience with the target of this transference, right? So for instance, the idea might be that you feel a certain way about your dad. The therapist becomes your kind of metaphorical dad, and the relationship between you and this figurative dad is improved. And then the therapist kind of unhooks you and you go about your life healed. That's sort of the idea anyway, right? Now, whether or not Maurice Conscious and his confreres are attempting to induce a psychotherapeutic benefit in Nicholas Earf, they do have a keen understanding of this concept of transference, and so too does, of course, John Fowles, the author of The Magus. Even if you haven't read this book in a number of years, I'm sure you will recall this episode in kind of the back half of the narrative that I refer to as the cistern ceremony. This is at a certain point in the kind of falling apart of the whole charade. Nicholas is tricked and then drugged and then kind of black-bagged into this ritual session underground, replete with wild occult symbolism. As part of this whole session, Nicholas is subjected to a psychoanalytic breakdown made all the more potent because it's presented by this female psychologist who has been posing as his kind of angelic love interest all this time. She talks about how he is selfish and socially inadequate. She says that he has the basic marriage-destructive drives of infidelity and inconsiderateness in everyday routine. She says that he exploits young women and has perhaps homosexual tendencies. Basically that he's a huge piece of shit, but she's pretty clear to state that it's really not his fault. She also says this, quote, "During my relationship with the subject, I, of course, experienced a certain degree of countertransference." Now, she says that this is because he is physically attractive and that his, quote, projected self-pity so powerfully impacts his surroundings that everyone becomes contaminated. It is actually a hell of a burn.